Well, it has been another hectic week in the news, hurricane recovery in the Bahamas, and then there was that Democratic debate in Houston. So let's take a closer look with our roundtable.
On the Power Roundtable today, Chris Smith is an attorney in Fort Lauderdale and a former Democratic state senator from Broward. Kathryn DePalo-Gould is a professor of political science at Florida International University. Ed Pozzouli is the president of Tripp Scott Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale and an influential voice in the Republican Party. Tripp Scott well represented here today.
Yeah, well, welcome.
You got us at both ends, like to see.
I like to see you go at it.
Yeah, we do.
Kathryn, great to have you back. Chris Smith, let me begin with you. I happen to think that Governor DeSantis has played this very correctly and cool over the last week. He has shown compassion, want to give the Bahamas the aid it needs, sending over $10 million in water there. But on the other hand, he's been pretty clear. Glenna was at the news conference Friday in Dania Beach where he said, we're going to help the Bahamas in the Bahamas, but you know, the federal immigration issue, that's not really our concern.
He's done a masterful job of trying to walk this tightrope of being a Florida populist, but not exactly getting on the wrong side of the president who he knows remembers everything and takes everything personally.
Right.
So I think in what he's doing is saying, I'm a Floridian. Floridians have a certain kinship with the Bahamas, and as the leader of the Floridians, I'm going to lean on that kinship and do whatever I can, but I don't want to tick off the guy in D.C. because he'll remember this and we may pay for it later.
Well, I think it's worth it to say that a lot of the narrative that we're hearing from Bahamians and their families here is that they want to come here and get help and get aid, take a shower, go to sleep, worry about how they're going to fix their homes, but they want to go back.
Yeah, Bahamians have the lowest, when you look statistically, they're the lowest number of people that overstay visas. They actually, come to visit and then go back. And so there's not a concern with them trying to stay over their visas.
But it does, your last segment when you had Michael here and you had the chief here, it is, if anybody doesn't believe that this country is exceptional, look at the partnership between the public and private partnership about how we help somebody in need or a country in need. It is just amazing. It is so unusual around the world, and I'm really proud of what they're doing.
I've never been more proud to be from South Florida as I was this week to see this outpouring. I'm sure Kathryn, by the way, let me correct myself. It was 10 truckloads of water, not $10 million. Altogether, the state is giving $11 million to the Bahamas. But I mean, this is a kind of a great moment, I think, showing the spirit, the heart of people in South Florida.
Absolutely. I think the connection with the Bahamian people and with the Bahamas is true. I mean, they're right next to our borders. Bimini's only 50 miles off our coast. And I think we have a definite kinship, as you mentioned. And I think the governor kind of drawing that line and not wanting to be responsible for any of the immigration issues, of which, as a governor, he's technically not, I think was really smart. And working with others across the aisle, too, I think has been particularly important.
You know, one of the controversies we see bubbling up this week is the president's refusal to grant temporary protected status to Bahamians. Congresswoman Frederica Wilson, who is going to have an update tomorrow from her intel, has written a letter asking for it. Chevron Jones, one of your old colleagues, who was here with us last week, who has family there, said it's not TPS that we really want as Bahamians, it's visa waivers. But Ed, speak to the sort of politics of a TPS refusal by the president when there really isn't a call for TPS by those who are on the front lines.
With respect to the Bahamas, the bottom line is that TPS really doesn't really apply here. So because they can come in and out, it's a very, you heard some of the requirements. They're pretty relaxed requirements to come in and out of the United States. So I don't see any of that changing. There wasn't even a mixed message coming out of Washington. There's some of that. Make sure that we don't let people don't slip in underneath. Bad people don't slip in. We saw some of that from President Trump. But the bottom line is that we've always had free travel back and forth with the Bahamas, and I don't think that's going to stop. So I don't think there's a need. Now, if you want to talk politics, somebody wants to say we should be give them special status because of this tragedy. when it's not necessary, I'm not so sure it's a political play as opposed to a humanitarian play.
Yeah, but Prime Minister Menace of the Bahamas and his government they have not asked for TPS.
No, right, and they haven't asked for it. They don't really want people leaving. They need, once some of those islands become habitable again, they need people to stay and help rebuild. And the good point about this, and I think it's emphasized to your viewers, is that what was made in the last segment again, only 100 of the 700 islands were impacted. And so the rest of the Bahamas is open and functional.
Yet there is a call to waive some of the visa requirements.
And I think
that's been,
some of that will happen.
that's been out there in
That's
limbo.
appropriate because a lot of times they don't have the paperwork.
Yeah, the
I mean, when you look at
blew away.
when you look at the devastation there, they don't have the paperwork needed for some of the visas. So I think that's the more immediate thing, and I think that's what Chevron Jones rightfully is really fighting for, is to use some of that discretion that was mentioned before on allowing them to come in.
So why hasn't that been granted yet?
Well, I mean, Trump is very consistent on how he thinks about others coming into the country. And, you have, again, bipartisan effort with Senator Rubio and Senator Scott asking for these visa waiver requirements. And I think Trump, even on TPS with Venezuelans, with Haitians, and extending that, he's been very consistent, if nothing else.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we want to kind of move on to the debate, but before we do, let's take a break. When we come back, we will talk about all those Democrats, 10 Democrats on stage in Houston. How'd they do?
It was a debate?
We'll be back in a minute.
Now we're getting started.
Welcome back on the Roundtable today. A great group. Chris Smith, former state senator from Fort Lauderdale. Kathryn DePalo-Gould, professor of political science at FIU, and the estimable Ed Pozzouli from Tripp Scott Law Firm in Fort Lauderdale, big GOP voice. So, all right, 3 hours, Thursday night, 10 candidates. Kathryn, I've got to ask you, as sort of this is your expertise, did it make any difference? Did it change anybody's mind?
No, in fact, we see this with a lot with debates. What happens is the guy or the gal that you want becomes solidified in these debates. And I think with two distinct wings of this Democratic Party fighting it out over who's going to win, which policies are going to prevail, whether it's a more moderate wing or progressive, you're having people very solidly line up between those candidates.
Yeah.
Well, this was the first time we've seen what everyone calls the top tier. Joe Biden, Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders standing right next to each other. For the first 40 minutes, it was all about them. And that exchange, Ed, mostly about health care as well. To give the takeaway.
In fairness, objectively.
Yeah, in fairness would be good.
Objectively, try not to be overly partisan, but I thought Joe Biden held his own. I thought that at least he stood his ground. For the first time, I saw him actually stake out a position. It's a moderate position today inside the Democratic Party in wanting to double down on Obamacare. That just tells you how far left the other folks are about Medicare for all. I mean, so you did see a real policy debate. They really got into the weeds, which was
they got far into the
really
weeds.
into the weeds.
Yeah.
But it was clear that it was Biden really saying one thing with Sanders and Warren saying something else, and basically saying we need to get rid of private insurance, forget about those 150 million people on private insurance, let's just do it. The government should have the power to do it, end of story. And that's a whole different debate. I mean, that's a whole different question. And at the very least, Biden stood his ground on that small part.
And I think going into the weeds was a positive for Biden, because if you look at what's been going on, they're saying, well, Warren has the policies and Sanders has the policies and a plan for everything. So Biden, by showing that he can get into the weeds and really get into healthcare, was a positive for him. I thought he'd go in just playing a prevent defense and just not mess up. But when I saw him going into particulars about healthcare, I think that was a positive and a pushback towards he doesn't have a plan.
All right, if we can, let me ask our ace director, cue up that soundbite where Julian Castro goes after Biden about forgetting on his healthcare policy, and it may have been premeditated, but it was Kathryn, it was a pretty dramatic moment. Let's watch this, and I want to get your reaction.
They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in.
Have to buy in. If she qualifies for Medicaid,
are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago?
All right, so are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago? That's the age card, ageism. You know, reminding people that he's 76 years old and maybe not as sharp as he used to be, but that in fact can come back and bite Mr. Castro in the rear end.
I think so. I think it played at home as sort of mean-spirited, and if people were paying attention, Biden was very specific about saying those who have lost their jobs can opt in. You know, you'd be enrolled in the Medicaid if you qualify. So it wasn't even accurate in that way. And I think generationally, we've seen this already in this debate season. Among these Democrats, you know, what generation is going to play out? And you have Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Joe Biden at the top of this ticket, and I think that's important for some of the younger candidates who want to make a difference.
But there's serious doubt. Cory Booker was on after the debate in one of the shows, and he point blank said, "Hey, I don't believe that Joe Biden can bring it over the line for the Democratic Party." And really, what it wasn't a knock on his age, just who he is. And so what you saw there was, you know, Julian Castro tried. It was sort of a mean-spirited punch. On the other hand, Biden then played into it later in the debate by saying that, you know, when children sleep, they should listen to their record players.
You know, we actually had that soundbite.
Let me set that up a little bit. They were talking about the condition of poor families, and Biden was talking about parents who don't really know how to raise their children, need a social worker to come in and teach them how to do it. And the language he used was kind of garbled and strange. Here is Biden talking about that.
We bring social workers into homes of parents to help them deal with how to raise their children. It's not that they don't want to help. They don't know quite what to do. Play the radio, make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night.
So aside from, you know, record players, they're hip again, just so you know. But besides that,
I don't think he was going there.
No, but the point of that whole thing is, Chris, he didn't answer Lindsey Davis's question. The question posed to Joe Biden was something along the lines of, and this is not verbatim, are Americans, or should Americans be responsible for the legacy of slavery? That was the question.
Right.
What was that answer?
Well, I think Biden certainly has the moderate lane, and he has the older voter lane. And in years past, that was the lane to be in because the condos control the primaries and stuff. Now we have this tough dichotomy of millennials are now starting to vote heavily. All in the condos are starting to die off a little bit. So that answer didn't quite answer the questions, but he was still going in that older Democratic voter lane. And I can tell you, my mother-in-law, my mother, and others, when they saw it, and that goes back to the Castro that we mentioned earlier, more than just an attack of him, it was disrespectful of this young guy being disrespectful to an older guy that a lot of those primary voters see themselves in. They see themselves as talking about record players. They see themselves in a lot of that. And how dare this young guy be disrespectful on TV to this older guy?
You know,
but Julian Castro's not getting the nomination. I mean, you know,
right.
he's not getting it. I mean, he's not getting it. There's Beto O'Rourke's not getting it. There's a bunch of those folks who aren't getting it. It's really going to come down to the top three, plus maybe Cory Booker, or in my view, Cory Booker or Kamala Harris among the three of the Sanders, Warren, and Biden. And the real question is, the Democrats are still talking about control by government. That is going to be, whether we call it socialist or not, however you frame it, it is still a controlling, ever-controlling government. Health care, and we have health care. We have, by the way, government-run health care in the Veterans Administration, and no veteran would want that. Come on.
Okay, so we got to take a break.
Okay, yeah.
But we'll come right back, promise, with more on this debate. Pick it up right where we left off. Stay with us. I so wish you would be here during commercials, but so it goes. Quickly, want to pick up just where we left off on the perception of older voters. Kathryn DePalo-Gould, what about the millennials who are supposed to be the major voting bloc in the 2020? Did any millennial even watch that debate? You know, Andrew Yang crowd surfs. We see that on Twitter. He's a cool guy. What is the takeaway for what may be the definitive vote if they would only vote?
Well, again, what's fascinating about that is I think a lot of them are still with Bernie. I'm not sure they are. They really, you know, they loved him last time around. they still like him this time.
Because
I'm
he
not
looks
sure
good on T-shirts, right?
Perhaps, but there really isn't any other alternative. I mean, Yang's sort of interesting, but that's a very specific demographic, I think, that he has with these sort of young, techie guys. But the millennials, I think, are still going for Bernie.
Let me ask you about Kamala Harris, because I thought she had kind of a okay night. I thought her best moment, Chris, was at the very opening when she spoke directly to Donald Trump. She was an attorney general, a prosecutor's district attorney in San Francisco, and she was sending a signal, I can prosecute Donald Trump, and I thought she was successful.
I think that is her lane. Everyone talks about, they can't wait till she debate Donald Trump on the stage or whatever. Showing that I was a prosecutor, I have those chops, and I can take the fight to him, I think is the lane she's trying to get. If I can just fix one thing, my mom just texted and said she listens to CDs or Alexa. So I want to apologize for saying my mom has a record.
CDs and Alexa, that's a pretty broad base.
So I want to apologize.
Your mom is very cool. If we can, there was one thing, and Ed, let me get you read on this, but I want to play a soundbite from Kamala Harris, could have been one of the stranger ones of the evening, about the Wizard of Oz. Let's hear this.
The bottom line is this: Donald Trump in office on trade policy, he reminds me of that guy in The Wizard of Oz, when you pull back the curtain, it's a really small dude.
Yeah, the really small dude who was the Wizard of Oz.
The dude that was the wizard.
Yeah, and then she had this kind of awkward laugh. That was
cackle.
It was. I didn't think it was her best night. I thought after the opening she fell away, and it was almost that she wasn't in the moment at all. That was a sort of off the cuff piece. The one I thought did have a good night is Cory Booker. I thought he had a better night than he had before. Yeah. He seemed to be mature around certain issues.
Yeah, and I liked him raising Veterans Affairs late in the debate, if anybody was still watching, and I know I was. What about Elizabeth Warren? I thought she was solid and poised. I mean, and she refused to get into a kind of personal argument with Biden.
Right, I think she was the only one really that tried to stay above the fray. I don't know that it helped her in the end, because she kind of became a non-entity really after the first hour.
That's right.
There wasn't much more that she added, and frankly, she really has all these policies and plans, but she doesn't get down into the nitty-gritty of what that means and who pays for it. Whereas as Bernie Sanders sort of did, Biden even complimented him on those ideas. So I think she had an okay night. I don't think she hurt herself, but I don't think she's getting beyond
Amy Klobuchar,
Right.
Bernie wrote the damn bill, she read the damn bill. She,
Right.
She is the moderate of moderates. She's got the experience. She knows what she's talking about. She's got the policy chops. Why isn't she resonating more?
The problem that I see with a lot of them is they're all showing how they can do against Trump. I can beat Trump this, I can out-debate Trump, I can do this. But they're trying to get through a primary. And so it's a tough road to try to hold, to try to do both. And Klobuchar, she doesn't have that lane. She's behind Biden in his lane. Everyone has their lanes, but she's like 3 car lengths behind him in that moderate lane.
Well, let's just point out that this afternoon at 3 in Little Havana at
Ball and Chain.
Ball and Chain, kind of a cool club. Joe Biden's going to be at Ball and Chain this afternoon, so let's see what he says.
Does he drink mojitos?
Anyway, we are out of time. Ed, always great to see you. Kathryn, thanks for coming back. Chris,
Thank you.
good to see you. 2 guys from one law firm. Unbelievable.
What's that hallway like?
All right.